Hey, it's Matt Roush.
And Mike Brennan.
And we're back with another segment of the M Squared TechCast with our weekly guest. It's Dr. Doom himself, Fred Brown, our resident epidemiologist and infectious disease expert, and he's going to tell us what's going on in the wide world of coronavirus. And this week, your topic is?
I thought we were talking a little bit about modeling. Last week we talked about biological modeling, and that's one of my areas of expertise. I have to be able to do that in order to understand how to best intervene when I'm working with governments and cities. So we try to project what the model is going to do, what the COVID is going to do in advance, so we can get ready. Otherwise, this thing could overwhelm you with this exponential growth. And so we talked last week about the fact that we thought that everything's going to be pretty flat for a little while, moving upwards slowly, but that by Halloween, between Halloween and Thanksgiving holidays, we're going to have a significant increase, and all of a sudden, from Thanksgiving up through December, we're talking about probably a 2 or 3-fold increase of what we have right now across the United States. I hope Michigan's spared, but I don't think it will be, because a lot of this increase is coming from the fact we're all moving inside again and turning on furnaces. And we saw what happened in the South when they moved inside and turned on their air conditioner. Same sort of situation. And the COVID virus is a respiratory virus, and that moves much more naturally through a cold environment than it does a warm one. It prefers a colder, darker environment to live. And so last week we talked a little bit about that. And so now I thought I'd talk about how to apply that to the economic environment. And if you want, I've got a couple of slides.
Yes.
How do you think we're doing economically?
Okay, not spectacular.
Well, I was going to say we lost 30 million jobs during the height of the initial outbreak, and as far as I know, we've got about half of them back. Is that about right?
That's about right. That is about right.
All right.
So we're on the upswing. And the trouble is that actually a lot of that has to do with the economic support that the government gives us. And when you see the distraction, sadly, of Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying, I'm concerned that Congress may take its eye off the ball, which they already have, and not fund as much as they need to get through this epidemic. They're talking about $1.5 trillion. I think that's just about what we need. But if it's less than that, it's going to really hurt the economy. If it's more than that, it might be okay, because we have to get through a difficult season during a lame duck session of Congress. So I wouldn't be too unhappy if they went to 2.5 or $3 trillion. But 2.5 is about as much as been on the table. And here's why. Right now, they have what they call a K-shaped recovery. Have you guys heard of the K-shaped recovery?
No.
So that's sort of interesting. They're part of the economy is taking off because they're actually doing better in this pandemic relatively compared to other parts of the economy. And the parts of the economy that are doing extremely well are those that can socially distance and still deliver. So if you think about consulting companies and big software firms and companies like Amazon and companies like Facebook, they do pretty well.
Financial services, things like that, right?
Absolutely. They do pretty well in this account. Financial services is a special case because they're actually influenced by what the Fed does, which we'll go into in a second. But yeah, those are the kind of companies that do extremely well. The service companies that can still be remote. The service companies that have to be face to face, like restaurants and travel services, those are really hurting. But if you can get away from the people and still do as well as you can, you actually reduce your costs. And you increase your revenue. So it's a great situation. And the FANG stocks, they call the FANG stocks. You can see that on the left-hand side here, the brown stocks. Those are the weighted average of Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and a few others. But those are the FANG stocks. Apple's last one, of course. You put those all together, and you separate them out from how the rest of the S&P. And you get the fact that they're going up pretty well. The rest of the S&P is that dark green line down below, and you can see they're not really recovering so well. And so that's what they call a K-shaped recovery. And so these stocks that are designed to help other companies distance themselves more effectively, they are doing extremely well in COVID. If you're not in that group, you're really having trouble. And the real problem we're having is that people get confused between what's happening in Wall Street and then versus what they call the real economy, which is happening on Main Street. And 33 million 500,000 people lost their jobs in April. And it is, we've recovered a few of those jobs, but those that are remaining are likely to be much more permanent. Those people went on furlough and then were hired back relatively quickly. Those kinds of companies basically went through the recovery and are probably going to be okay, but they're struggling. I work with several, for example, airline companies, and they've been holding on by, but they, they've been losing, the company I was working with was losing $17 to $25 million a week, a day. I'm sorry, a day, and that gets expensive after a while. It just can't keep holding on, so you eventually have to let people go if your business doesn't come back. And this is a demand side unemployment that is really unprecedented. We've never seen this kind of trouble since really the Great Depression. So the answer to the question is how we're doing economically is, for a lot of people, not well, and it's going to get worse. And it's really worrisome to watch COVID continue and people being at risk. The issue that we're going to have to watch is what the quality, quantity, and timing of the government Main Street stimulus is in the economy. And that's why I'm so worried about Ruth Gately, the distraction of the Supreme Court justice discussion, because that really could.
Well, and the worst job losses are in like what you could describe as the travel and entertainment sectors, right?
Travel, entertainment, leisure, yeah, exactly. Those are the ones that are really, unfortunately, they're having the most trouble distancing and still keeping their operating model going. So that's the challenge. So that's one big area of the economic modeling that we have to think about: Wall Street versus Main Street. The second big thing about the economy is the fact of the Fed. The Fed has really stepped up beyond what I was forecasting they would. I was forecasting they put in 1.2 trillion. They've actually put in $3 trillion into the economy. And you can see that. You can see there are all of the other economies on the far right. Our color is light green on the far right. And you can see that's the whole world economy stimulus. And we're kind of about 90% of that.
I was going to say, it looks like 85 or 90% there. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so we have really put in a lot of money, and now they're, which is actually a good thing, because otherwise our whole economy would have collapsed. Everything would have frozen up. That's what we don't want. That's what we want to avoid, is a freeze of the whole of the consumer of consumer spending completely. And like I said before, the trick about pandemics is to smash them early, kind of over respond, and that's exactly what the Fed did. They were well consulted. They knew what was going to happen. They came in and they really did a much better job than I think any other Fed in the world did. Any other central bank did. One of the issues we have is, of course, reinforced racial disparities. Unfortunately, we used old systems to inject this money back into the economy. And if you look at the kind of what happened at the end of the day, if you didn't have relationships with a bank, and many Black minority-owned businesses did not have relationships with banks that had access to this money, they simply were out of the picture. So only 1% of the PPP program went to that part of the economy, and that just causes more disparity and actually more concentration of wealth, unfortunately, in many cases. So we'll see what happens. One thing that is happening is that consumers are starting to save a lot more, and when they save a lot more, the velocity of the money that you put into it doesn't accelerate as much as you anticipate. So we may actually have to put in more than we actually anticipated. I think the Fed has calculated this pretty well. So the big issue is, especially around what they call quantitative easing policies. How much money does the Fed want to inject back into the economy by basically buying commercial assets, commercial paper? To the extent they're willing to do more and more of that, the economy will do well. To the extent they'll do less and less and simply work on interest rates, it'll have more and more trouble. The economy will get more and more sluggish. So that aspect of what they're investing in, how they're investing in, and how fast is a big deal. They set aside 1.2 trillion, and they've only spent in the billions. So they've got a long way to go on the QE side. So that's sort of what's happening at a high level on the Fed level, the real economy, the stock market economy, and we can certainly talk about anything in that in more detail if you like. But what I wanted to go back to is kind of the truth is that the biologic models are going to overwhelm anything we do economically. The problem is that we're trying to address a biologic problem, a health problem, with traditional tools of the economy. And this isn't this isn't actually where we've got the tools that can help, but it's not really solving the bottom line of the problem. The bottom line of the problem is what COVID is doing. And there are basically three bets that any government can make. The first bet is to hope that you'll get lucky, that we'll basically, there's a vaccine coming, everything's going to be wonderful. Give it, kind of middle of next year, we'll be coming out of this, everything will be, in fact, some people even think, October, we come out of it and it'll be great. But if that's the case, then basically you're going to go through a V-shaped, my estimates would be go through a V-shaped recovery. You'd have about 500,000 deaths until a vaccine gets in control. That would happen if you had a perfect vaccine come out and everyone was vaccinated extremely rapidly. That would come out by the end of 2021. So that's sort of what the timing is of that. And what you want to do in that situation is you want to avoid permanent economic damage, right? So you want to restore confidence, say everything's wonderful, go out and do what you normally do, and you'd encourage all the normalcy you could because you knew that this vaccine was coming and everything was going to be great, and you sure don't want to have your economy freeze on you just before the vaccine comes on. So that would be the strategy if you thought you were getting lucky. And basically, the United States and Russia have bet on getting lucky. That's our bet. And the bet is placed, so we're going to let it ride. But there are other countries that are doing things a little bit differently. The another one is a marathon. It believes that COVID will continue for several years, and therefore you want to be very good at carefully controlling how much COVID expands and contracts, and then how much that affects your economy. And finally, under the brutal model, you just let things slide. So that would be India, that would be Brazil, that would be Sweden. So those countries are letting things go. UK, to a large extent, is letting things go. Sadly, they just shut down again, so maybe they're getting back to the marathon. Europe and China and Korea and Taiwan and Singapore are more of the countries that are going for a marathon kind of approach. That gives you a sense of where all the bets are right now in the governments. Now let's talk about our U.S. economy. Basically, you can see that what I put into my model is how much you've got for positive factors helping you increase the overall economy, and where the negative factors are. And you can see that we're pretty well balanced when we started to move in to the year. What it was slowing, we were slowing down a little bit. The dollar velocity was going down a little bit. The government debt levels were going up to pay for the big tax cut President Trump arranged, so that also was having a little bit of pressure on the economy. But unemployment was doing great. Our tax rates were great. Our interest rates were great. And so, that sort of offset, and we were, sort of continuing to churn along pretty well, not bad. Then we see what happens when we had shutdowns. And, it wasn't that we decided to have shutdown, and COVID made us have shutdown. So there wasn't just, no one was willing to go out and buy stuff. That was, people say, oh yes, we decided to shut down. No. It had nothing to do with what we did. COVID said, if you don't shut down, basically we're going to kill everybody on the planet. So we decided, we'll back off a little bit. That really was what caused the shutdown, is COVID hit us. And after that, the savings rate started to increase. So that actually caused us to push down the economy. Healthcare investments actually are slightly negative here because you've got to reinvest in infrastructure that you should have had to begin with. So they don't help as much as they should. Structural unemployment increased significantly. Corporate earnings went down a lot because we didn't have any revenues. And taxes ultimately are going to increase because someone's going to have to pay for all this. So those are the things that are pushing us down as we try to move out of this issue. And on the other hand, we had the Fed, as I said, the interest rates, the QE, all that, the CARES Act, the HEROES Act coming through Congress are stimulating the economy. So those are the things you have to offset. And what's interesting about this is that at any given point, what COVID does actually completely overwhelms anything that, Fed can do anything they want with interest rates. But if we've got a mutated virus on our hands that is, that has a death, that triples the death rate suddenly, what the Fed does with interest rates isn't going to matter at all. So we have to always model COVID first, and then look at the issue on how it hits the economy. So you can see that there's a huge range of how long this COVID era could last. It could last 18 months if we're lucky with a vaccine, or it could last 120 months if we're really unlucky with how well these interventions work. And the recovery, no matter what happens, is going to take a year plus, because it takes time for the economy to regain consumer confidence, actually disperse the solution that actually stopped the COVID, and then after that you get normalcy. So normalcy, I think, might happen as early as 2023, but it may take us until 2030 to get, or even beyond, to actually get to what we consider completely normal lives and back to the same economy we had before this COVID virus hit. That's sort of a sense of how we model this. And the answer you can see is that it looks like we're going to have sort of a square root function. So it's going to come down sharply and then come back up and then slowly go upward. So let's take a look at that. Basically, here are the different square root functions depending on what happens to the COVID virus. We talked about the 3 bets. One was to get lucky, and that's the case. If we get lucky, you can see that we're going to. That's in the green. So if you look at the green, it's right here, comes down, comes back up quite rapidly, and basically by 2023 you're back to a normal economy. Middle of 2023 you're back to a normal economy again. Now, I'm not talking about the stock market. I'm talking about the real economy, where people have been unemployed and gradually get back to work. You can see how far things came down. Our GDP was at about $21.7 trillion, $20.7 trillion, excuse me, and went down 35% in that period where we shut down. And the U6 unemployment rate, that's a full unemployment. We hear on the radio is the U3 unemployment rate. That's people who actually filed for unemployment. The U6 unemployment rate is people who are the complete number of people who are not working. That went down to about 22.5%. That went from 4.4% to minus 22.4%, 5%. So really a huge dip, and then slowly came back up again. Now, if we're on a marathon race, that means that we've got this. The blue line is the marathon, and basically, I think we're going to cost about $12.6 trillion to get through it. We'll have to invest in the new infrastructure and healthcare quite a bit. It's going to take us about 4 years to get through the process, and we'll have normalcy in about 5.5 years. If we let things go though, and we don't get good therapies, this could cost us $28 trillion and take up to 10 years. So we have to really start continuing to focus, continuing to invest in the space, or we'll move to a brutal kind of scenario. And unfortunately, what happens if you try to get lucky enough times and keep failing, what happens is you fall into a brutal, right? Because you just a little bit, one more bet on getting lucky. Let's double or nothing again. Let's double, and all of a sudden you followed the brutal pathway without really knowing it. You've been sucked into the wish of the attractors of the bet. So my thought about how to manage this is actually to try to hedge that scenario where we're gonna see if we're gonna get lucky to begin with. So you kind of say, fine, let's evaluate that bet, and if it doesn't work out, if we still don't have control of the virus because our vaccines aren't quite as good as we were hoping they would be, then I'd recommend at least investing in a lot more testing, a lot more healthcare infrastructure. So if you have to go a long time, at least you're ready for the downside. In this case right now, we're not really even ready for the downside. We haven't really invested in testing. We haven't really invested much into PPE. We're way behind on the demand side of a lot of the most important drugs. So we have to redo that investment. Otherwise, we will move into a brutal scenario, which is going to be a lot more expensive in the long run. So how bad do you think it is? Believe it or not, if you added up every recession we've had between 1945, after the Great Depression, and today, you just barely have the amount of down that we've had in this one biological event. And the reason for that is that, as I said, it's not really an economic event. This is a biological event that's affecting the whole world simultaneously. And so when we had our Great Recession, that took us several years to get out of, and it took our economy down about 5.5%. This took our economy down a lot. You have to add up both of the major recessions we had during the Great Depression, and then you get to the level of of unemployment and GDP effect that we had just with this COVID issue. So you have to add up what happened in the dot-com, what happened in the 1990s, what happened in the 1980s, what happened in the 1970s, all the recessions in the 60s and 50s, and all the recessions in the 1940s. If you add all those together, you just barely get to the point where you're hitting the amount of impact this is having on our economy economically right now. The reason we're not feeling it is because there's enough stimulus that the government has put in, unlike in the Great Depression where they pulled money out, put all sorts of tariffs up and so on. We're actually doing some of the right things. And so we don't feel it day to day, but if we don't continue to do the right things, it'll feel really, really bad for an awful long time. So that's sort of where the economy is. So my general forecast for the economy is expect sustained negative growth, a reverse square root recovery, slow up, big peak down, slow up, upside. I think it'll probably be at about 8 to 9% unemployment for about 5 years. Unfortunately, there'll be additional lockdowns that may be required that will cause the economy to dip again into a big downturn, and that may happen in this February. We'll have to see, February, March period. Probably not if President Trump is reelected, because he'll feel like he has a mandate to continue. But if Vice President Biden is elected, he may choose to lock down the economy in order to gain control, because frankly, we are so far off the norm about how badly we're doing compared to all the other countries, except with the exception of Peru and Brazil. But if you're talking about the countries who have vaccine capability, who are advanced economies, first world economies, G7 level economies, we are so far off the norm. We can't even copy what they're doing to get better, because we have so much COVID in our environment. We're going to have novel tools to address a novel environment. Well, that goes both on the economy. So we're using QE. We may have to go to negative interest rates. I don't think that'll happen, but we may have to. And we may have to go to brand new kinds of vaccines, which we're developing. I can talk about that next week if you like. And we're going to see lots of constraints, right? Especially on the direct service businesses that are going to actually limit the productivity and GDP growth. And that's going to keep unemployment elevated, because sadly, it's a global problem. The rest of the economies aren't stimulated enough. They can't help us. We're not helping ourselves because so much of our economy is shut down. Combined makes this a hard one to get out of unless we get a real technical solution fast. And so hopefully the vaccine will come through. There's going to be continued inequality, and it's going to increase. The large are going to get larger, and the poor are going to get sicker, sadly. And for people who are, on the top part of the wealth graph, they might think they're doing well compared to the barista at Starbucks. But the truth is that if you think about what really made their life fun was the extra house in a nice place in the world, the fancy car. Those pieces of spice aren't really there anymore, right? What are you going to? You can't get a real happy life until you solve this problem. So I think everyone's going to be a little bit depressed about where we are. I think there is going to be tax increases, and they may be stealth taxes, or they may be explicit, but I think ultimately everyone's going to have to pay for what's happened at this point. And there's going to be some structural changes that are going to be permanent from this. We'll have some new parts of the economy, some new agencies in the government, and so on that are going to be permanent as a result of this. And we may have permanent issues with our economy that we have to dig ourselves out of on the commercial real estate side, on the retail mall side, on a whole bunch of other areas, and especially when it comes to funding small municipalities and state governments. So with that, what do you guys think?
Well, I sure wouldn't want to be investing in office buildings and shopping malls right now. I can talk about
No, well, you might be able to buy on the downside. Some
that's true.
Some people are looking at that.
I mean, look what Dan Gilbert did in downtown Detroit. Eventually, downtown Detroit got so cheap they were having a sale on skyscrapers. So
that's right. If you can wait it out 3 to 5 years, I mean, you could, but you have to be able to mothball for 3 to 5 years. Don't think you're going to be able to wait for 6 months or going to turn around in 3 months, because that's not going to happen.
Right.
If you can sort of mothball, hang on there. It's a great time to borrow money. You got real low interest rates. What the heck? May as well roll some die and see if you get lucky on the upside. That could happen on the investor side. That's not true about you and me and the rest of the average guys, right? We can't do those bets, but there are guys who are out there who are doing that regularly right now, I'm sure.
Well, it's been weird to see which parts of the economy are doing really well, because I have a friend of mine who's actually a security guard at a community college, and then for a side hustle, he does like kitchen and bathroom work. He's never been busier. You know,
Yeah.
everybody's
Oh,
fixing up
yeah.
the house. Everybody's fixing up the house that they've got because they can't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's
So-
all about Lowe's. It's all about, right. I mean, those are the companies that are doing really well. So Lowe's and Home Depot and all those. I shouldn't make plugs.
Okay, you're not plugging. You're
I know nothing
advertising.
about investing, so please don't take anything.
Support your local hardware store, folks. Yes, right.
Yeah. Do not believe anything I say about investments. I know nothing about investments, so please.
Yeah.
I can tell you a lot about the large economy. I can tell you a lot about the pandemic, because I'm an expert in pandemic management. But I investment advice. Please don't believe anything I say.
Well, one of the businesses is doing well, a group of businesses that are doing well in Michigan, is my other publication. The cannabis and the CBD world right now is exploding in Michigan. We've only been legal for cannabis since December, and people are buying it like crazy, and tax dollars are coming in, and I guess because they have a fair amount of time on their hands and they're at home or something, but. And those same businesses, I think you might see a lot of them moving into those empty warehouses and whatnot.
That's right. Absolutely.
They're at that stage where they want to expand, and these warehouses are lease spots that have been in malls or whatever are closing down, and so that would give them an opportunity to move into those.
Yeah, lock a big 5-year deal in right now, right? I mean, it's the right time to go for something like that, possibly. The one thing that is interesting is that Michigan actually was the #1 state in terms of support that it gave its citizens during the shutdown. When you look at the federal plus the state government subsidies for unemployment, Michigan was #1. We were $1,500 ahead of the average per month for the state residents. Unfortunately, now that you see those subsidies being pulled back, we could have actually a bigger hit than most other states too. So something to think about. But at least we did well on the first round, and hopefully people say.
Well, we got about 3 minutes left, so that's not enough time to really go into any subjects. But let me just hit you with a quick one that's always sort of perplexed me. Are viruses sentient? I mean, they seem so intelligent. They seem to know what to do, the right things to have the biggest infection bang. I'm not an epidemiologist like you, so I don't know. Are they smart?
Well, it turns out that organisms like viruses actually are. Viruses don't have really an intelligence until they start infecting people, because they need us in order. They're sort of a parasite. They're a genetic parasite. They're sort of like a message in a bottle. And you open up the bottle and you read the message, and then it becomes powerful. The same thing happens in our bodies. Virus gets into you, it opens up the message, all of a sudden the virus becomes alive and powerful. And they don't really communicate with one another to our knowledge. There are, interestingly, some really interesting studies about even slime molds and things like that communicate electronically. It's a sort of very, very cool research. But in this case, they don't really communicate, but they are very effective in getting into every open area. If you leave anything untouched, nature is just relentless. I mean, it will fill up every niche, every opportunity, every availability. If you don't cover it up, it's there. And we know that from dust and everything else. It's just gonna hit you. And if you don't control it and have a strategy for controlling it, so it isn't that it's smart. It's just that we're letting it have too many opportunities, and that's what's hurting us.
Traditional four-year students love Lawrence Technological University's thriving campus life, but LTU has always met non-traditional students' needs too. Lawrence Tech offers over 100 degree and certificate programs that can get adult students started or back on track. And most of our classes are conveniently offered evenings at our beautiful Southfield campus or online, so you can balance your social, family, and work life even while you power up your career. Lawrence Tech, where Blue Devils dare.